In a quiet little town surrounded by lush green fields and tall oak trees, there lived a remarkable woman named Mrs. Evelyn Thompson. At 93 years old, Evelyn was one of the most respected figures in her community. Her family had owned the same farm for over a century, passed down from generation to generation. The land wasn't just dirt and crops, it was a piece of history, filled with memories of laughter, hard work, and love. But now, that cherished legacy was under threat. Evelyn's days were simple but fulfilling. She woke up early every morning, brewed herself a strong cup of coffee, and walked through the rows of corn, checking on the plants as if they were her own children. Sometimes she would sit on the porch, rocking gently in her creaky chair, watching the sun rise above the horizon. Though her body was frail, her spirit remained unbreakable. People often marveled at how Evelyn still managed to take care of such a large farm all by herself. "It's not me," she'd say with a warm smile. "It's the land. It takes care of us." But life isn't always kind, especially when greed enters the picture. One chilly autumn morning, Evelyn stepped outside to find something unusual. Pinned to her front door, a crumpled piece of paper. Curious, she unfolded it and read the words scrawled across it. "Sell us your land, or we'll take it." Her heart sank. The handwriting was messy, almost careless, but the message was clear. Someone wanted her farm, and badly enough to threaten her. At first, Evelyn tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just some prank pulled by mischievous kids, she thought. But deep down, she knew better. Over the past few months, whispers about a dangerous gang moving into the area had spread like wildfire. They called themselves the Iron Claws, and they weren't shy about using violence to get what they wanted. The townsfolk avoided them at all costs, knowing full well the consequences of crossing their path. Evelyn realized with growing dread that this note wasn't a joke. It was a warning. Despite her fears, Evelyn refused to let the threat consume her. She had faced hardships before, including the loss of her beloved husband, James, 10 years earlier. He had been her rock, teaching her everything about farming and standing firm against challenges. Before he passed, he left her with one final piece of advice. "Never give up what matters most, Evelyn. No matter what happens, hold your ground." Those words echoed in her mind as she stared at the ominous note. This farm wasn't just hers. It belonged to her parents, her grandparents, and everyone who came before her. Giving it up wasn't an option. Still, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She spent the rest of the day pacing back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. Should she call the police? Would they even believe her? Or should she confront the gang herself? Neither option seemed safe. As night fell, she locked every door and window, clutching a flashlight tightly in her hand. Sleep didn't come easily. That night, every creak of the old wooden house made her jump, imagining shadowy figures lurking outside. The next morning, Evelyn decided to share her troubles with her neighbors. She trusted them. They were good people who cared about each other and looked out for one another. When she showed them the note, their faces turned pale. "You shouldn't stay here alone, Evelyn," said Sarah, a kind-hearted woman who lived 2 farms down. "These guys mean business. We've heard stories, terrible things." Others nodded in agreement, offering to keep watch or help however they could. But no one dared suggest going directly to the gang. Everyone knew the risks involved. As the days went by, Evelyn kept a close eye on her surroundings. She noticed strange cars driving slowly past her property late at night. Once, she even spotted a group of men lingering near the edge of her field, their faces obscured by hoods. Each sighting sent shivers down her spine, but she refused to show fear. Instead, she carried a sturdy walking stick wherever she went, ready to defend herself if necessary. Yet, despite her bravery, she couldn't deny the loneliness creeping into her heart. If only her son Marcus were here, she thought. Marcus was Evelyn's pride and joy. A decorated Navy SEAL, he had dedicated his life to serving his country. Growing up, he'd spent countless hours working alongside his father on the farm, learning the value of hard work and resilience. Even after joining the military, he always found time to visit during holidays, bringing gifts and stories from faraway places. But lately, his visits had grown rare due to his demanding schedule overseas. Evelyn missed him dearly, though she never complained. She understood the sacrifices soldiers made for the greater good. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, word of her plight eventually reached Marcus. A concerned neighbor, unable to bear seeing Evelyn struggle alone, decided to call him. The phone rang late one evening while Marcus was stationed in a remote part of the world. Exhausted from a long day of training, he answered reluctantly, but immediately sat upright when he heard the voice on the other end. "Marcus, it's Sarah," the caller began. "Your mom needs you. There's trouble at the farm." By the time Sarah finished explaining, Marcus's mind was racing. Images of his mother facing danger alone flooded his thoughts, filling him with guilt and anger. How could he have let this happen? He promised himself he'd protect her no matter where his duty took him. Without wasting another moment, Marcus contacted his commanding officer and requested emergency leave. To his relief, his request was granted. Within days, he was on a plane headed home, determined to stand by Evelyn's side. When Marcus finally arrived, the change in atmosphere was palpable. The once peaceful farm now felt tense, as if the air itself carried a weight of uncertainty. Evelyn greeted him with tears in her eyes, hugging him tightly as if afraid he might disappear again. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Marcus may have been away for years, but he hadn't forgotten where he came from or who raised him. Together they vowed to protect their home, no matter the cost. Little did they know, the real battle was just beginning. The day after Marcus arrived, the farm felt different, not because of the gang's threats, but because of the quiet confidence Marcus brought with him. Standing tall and broad-shouldered, he moved around the property with purpose, inspecting every corner as if preparing for battle. Evelyn watched her son closely, pride swelling in her chest. Though she had always been strong, there was something reassuring about having Marcus by her side. For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly, knowing that someone capable was looking out for her. Marcus wasted no time getting to work. He started by securing the perimeter of the farm. Using skills he'd learned during his years as a Navy SEAL, he reinforced the old wooden fence, installed motion sensor lights, and set up cameras at strategic points. "We need eyes everywhere," he told Evelyn matter-of-factly. "If they come back, we'll know." Evelyn nodded, though part of her worried about provoking the gang further. What if they retaliated? What if things got worse? But Marcus reassured her. "Don't worry, Mom," he said firmly. "I've dealt with worse than this." Despite his calm demeanor, Marcus wasn't naive. He knew these men weren't ordinary criminals. They were organized, ruthless, and dangerous. That's why he spent hours researching the Iron Claws online, piecing together information about their operations. From what he gathered, the gang specialized in seizing valuable properties through intimidation and violence. They targeted vulnerable people like Evelyn, counting on fear to force them into submission. But Marcus also discovered something else. The gang operated in secrecy, avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. This gave him an advantage. If he could make them believe he wasn't someone to mess with, they might back off without escalating the situation. On the third night of Marcus's return, the gang made their move. It was well past midnight when Evelyn woke up to the sound of voices outside. Her heart raced as she slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the window. Peering through the curtains, she saw 3 shadowy figures standing near the barn. One of them held a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness as they examined the newly installed security system. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but instead, she quietly called out to Marcus, who was sleeping on the couch downstairs. Within seconds, Marcus was awake and alert. Grabbing a baseball bat from the corner of the room, he crept toward the door, careful not to make a sound. Before stepping outside, he glanced back at Evelyn. "Stay here," he whispered. "No matter what happens, don't come out." Then, without waiting for her response, he opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall under the dim glow of the porch light, his silhouette casting long shadows across the yard. The gang members turned their attention to him immediately, their flashlights blinding him momentarily. "Who are you?" one of them growled, his voice low and menacing. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step forward, his presence commanding enough to make the men hesitate. "This is private property," Marcus said calmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Leave now, or I'll call the cops." The men laughed, clearly unimpressed. "You think we're scared of the police?" one of them sneered. "Old lady inside told us to sell, guess she didn't mention you." Another man added, "Maybe we should teach you a lesson." That's when Marcus acted. Moving. Faster than any of them expected, he lunged forward, snatching the flashlight from the nearest man and using it to disarm him. Before the others could react, Marcus spun around, delivering a swift kick to the second man's knee. The crack echoed through the night as the man crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg in pain. The third man, realizing he was outnumbered, dropped his weapon and fled into the darkness, leaving his comrades behind. By the time Evelyn ventured outside, trembling but determined, Marcus was already tying up the two injured men with rope he'd found in the barn. Their groans filled the air as they struggled against their bonds, but Marcus ignored them. "Call the sheriff," he instructed Evelyn, handing her his phone. "Tell them exactly what happened." When the authorities arrived, they found the scene eerily calm. Marcus stood beside Evelyn, explaining the events in detail while the deputies loaded the gang members into their patrol cars. One of the officers shook his head in disbelief. "You handled this pretty well for a civilian," he remarked. Marcus shrugged, just doing what needed to be done. News of the incident spread quickly throughout the town. Neighbors who had once feared speaking out against the Iron Claws began to feel a renewed sense of hope. If Marcus could stand up to them, maybe others could too. Evelyn, however, remained cautious. While she was grateful for her son's bravery, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The gang leader, Victor, hadn't shown his face yet, and she doubted he would take such a defeat lying down. Over the next few days, Marcus doubled his efforts to fortify the farm. He taught Evelyn basic self-defense techniques, showing her how to use everyday objects like kitchen knives and garden tools as weapons if necessary. He also reached out to local law enforcement, urging them to increase patrols in the area. To his surprise, many officers expressed frustration over their inability to stop the gang's activities. "They're slippery," one deputy admitted. "Every time we get close, they vanish." Determined to gather more evidence, Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. Under the cover of darkness, he began patrolling the outskirts of the farm, watching for any suspicious activity. On one such night, he spotted a group of men gathering near the edge of the woods. Hidden among the trees, he listened intently as they discussed their next plan of attack. They spoke of hitting the farm again, but this time with reinforcements. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew they wouldn't stop until they either succeeded or were stopped permanently. Returning home, Marcus shared what he'd learned with Evelyn. Her face paled, but she refused to let fear take hold. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Marcus smiled faintly, admiration shining in his eyes. "Now we prepare," he replied. "And we wait." As the days passed, the standoff between Marcus and the gang grew increasingly tense. Both sides knew that a confrontation was inevitable, but neither was willing to back down. For Evelyn, the uncertainty weighed heavily on her mind. She often found herself staring out the window, wondering if this nightmare would ever end. Yet, even in her darkest moments, she drew strength from her son's unwavering determination. Together, they had faced countless challenges, and together they would face this one. Little did they know, the climax of their struggle was closer than they imagined. Victor, the gang leader, had grown impatient. Tired of being humiliated and robbed of his plans, he vowed to settle the score once and for all. And when he finally made his move, it would test Marcus and Evelyn in ways they never anticipated. The tension in the air was thick, like storm clouds pressing down on the horizon. Marcus and Evelyn knew it was only a matter of time before the gang returned. Victor, the ruthless leader of the Iron Claws, wasn't someone who accepted defeat lightly. His ego had been bruised and his reputation was at stake. For him, backing down wasn't an option. It would mean losing control over not just the farm, but also his hold on the town. So, while Marcus worked tirelessly to prepare for whatever came next, Evelyn prayed silently that her son wouldn't have to face too much danger. Each day felt longer than the last. Marcus spent hours patrolling the property, checking the cameras, and reinforcing weak spots in the fence. He taught Evelyn how to use a rifle safely, though she resisted at first. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said firmly, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus understood her hesitation but explained gently, "It's not about hurting them, Mom. It's about protecting yourself and this land." Reluctantly, Evelyn agreed to learn. She practiced shooting targets set up in the field, her aim improving with each attempt. Though she still disliked the idea of violence, she couldn't deny the sense of empowerment it gave her. Meanwhile, Marcus continued gathering intelligence on the gang. One evening, disguised in dark clothing, he ventured into the nearby woods, where the Iron Claws often gathered. Hidden among the shadows, he observed their movements, listening carefully to their conversations. What he heard chilled him to the bone. Victor was planning something big, a full-scale assault on the farm involving more men and heavier weapons. They were no longer playing games. They intended to take the land by force, consequences be damned. When Marcus returned home, he shared the news with Evelyn. Her hands trembled as she listened, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on hers. "We're going to fight back," he said firmly. "But we need help. We can't do this alone." The next morning, Marcus visited the sheriff's office. He brought along the evidence he'd collected, photos of the gang members, recordings of their plans, and detailed maps of their hideouts. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom, listened intently, his expression growing darker with each word. "This is serious," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "If what you're saying is true, then these guys are way more dangerous than we thought." Marcus nodded. "They've already attacked us twice. Next time they won't stop until they get what they want, or until they're stopped permanently." Sheriff Tom hesitated, clearly torn between duty and fear. Finally, he sighed and said, "All right, I'll see what I can do. But you need to understand, this isn't going to be easy. These people are connected, they have eyes everywhere." Determined not to rely solely on law enforcement, Marcus turned to the townsfolk. He organized a meeting at the local community center, inviting everyone who cared about the safety of their neighborhood. To his surprise, nearly 50 people showed up, their faces etched with worry yet brimming with resolve. Marcus stood at the front of the room, addressing the crowd with quiet authority. "The Iron Claws aren't just after my mom's farm," he began. "They're after all of us. If we don't stand together now, they'll keep taking everything we hold dear." His words struck a chord. Slowly, people began volunteering their support. Some offered to patrol the streets at night, keeping watch for suspicious activity. Others promised to provide supplies or shelter if needed. A few even suggested setting traps around the outskirts of town to slow the gang down. By the end of the meeting, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope. The community might not have weapons or military training, but they had something equally powerful: unity. Back at the farm, preparations intensified. Marcus trained a small group of volunteers in basic self-defense and strategy, teaching them how to respond if the gang attacked. Evelyn, meanwhile, focused on rallying the women in town. Together they cooked meals, sewed protective gear, and kept morale high. Despite the looming threat, there was a strange sense of camaraderie in the air. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now worked side by side, united by a common cause. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, Marcus sat on the porch with Evelyn. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of autumn leaves. "Do you think we can win this?" Evelyn asked softly, breaking the silence. Marcus looked at her, his eyes reflecting both determination and uncertainty. "I don't know, Mom," he admitted. But I do know one thing, we can't give up, not without a fight. As if on cue, the sound of distant engines shattered the peaceful moment. Both Marcus and Evelyn froze, their hearts pounding. Peering into the darkness, they saw headlights approaching rapidly, followed by the unmistakable rumble of motorcycles. The gang had arrived, and they weren't holding back. Victor led the charge, flanked by at least a dozen heavily armed men. Their faces were masked, their intentions clear. As they surrounded the farm, Marcus sprang into action. "Stay inside," he shouted to Evelyn before grabbing his rifle and stepping out onto the porch. The sight of him standing tall, silhouetted, against the dim light, sent a ripple of unease through the gang. But Victor wasn't intimidated. Stepping forward, he removed his mask, revealing a cruel smirk. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, boy," he sneered. "Time to pay the price." Without waiting for a response, Victor signaled his men to advance. Chaos erupted as gunfire lit up the night sky. Marcus moved with precision, using every ounce of his training to evade bullets and counterattack. From inside the house, Evelyn watched in horror, clutching the rifle Marcus had taught her to use. When one of the gang members broke away from the group and headed toward the barn, she realized she had no choice. Taking a deep breath, she steadied her aim and fired. The shot rang out, startling everyone, including herself. The man dropped to the ground, clutching his leg, giving Marcus the opening he needed to turn the tide. For what felt like hours, the battle raged on. Marcus fought valiantly, taking down several gang members while shouting instructions to the volunteers stationed around the property. The townspeople, emboldened by his leadership, held their ground, using makeshift barricades and traps to slow the attackers down. Even Evelyn joined the fray, firing occasional shots to keep the enemy at bay. Finally, when dawn began to break, the remaining gang members retreated, dragging their wounded comrades with them. Exhausted but victorious, Marcus surveyed the damage. The farm was battered, with broken fences and scorched patches of earth, but it still stood. More importantly, everyone was alive. As neighbors emerged from their hiding places to assess the aftermath, cheers erupted throughout the town. Against all odds, they had defended their home. Evelyn hugged Marcus tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it." Marcus smiled faintly, though his mind was already racing ahead. This victory was significant, but it wasn't the end. Victor was still out there, and he wouldn't rest until he got revenge. For now, however, the community could breathe a little easier. They had proven that together, they were stronger than any threat, and that knowledge gave them the courage to face whatever came next. The morning after the battle was eerily quiet, as if the world itself had paused to recover from the chaos of the night. The farm lay battered but defiant, its fields scarred by tire tracks and bullet holes, yet still standing tall. Marcus walked through the property, inspecting the damage with a mixture of pride and unease. He knew they had won this round, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on him. Broken fences would need fixing, crops trampled underfoot would take months to regrow, and the emotional toll on Evelyn and the townsfolk was far greater than anyone could measure. Evelyn sat on the porch, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. Though the immediate danger had passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was looming just beyond the hills. "They'll be back," she murmured to herself, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. She didn't want to believe it. She wanted to think that last night's victory had been enough to scare Victor and his gang away for good. But deep down she knew better. Men like Victor didn't give up easily. Marcus joined her on the porch, his face lined with exhaustion. Despite his fatigue, he forced a reassuring smile. "We're ready for them, Mom," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No matter what happens next, we'll handle it together." Evelyn nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Together, they watched the sun rise higher into the sky, casting golden light across the damaged land. It was a reminder that even after the darkest nights, life always found a way to push forward. Word of the standoff spread quickly throughout the town. People who hadn't been directly involved came to offer their help, bringing food, tools, and supplies. Some volunteered to repair the fence while others helped clear debris from the fields. The sense of community grew stronger with each passing hour, fueled by shared purpose and gratitude. Marcus stood at the center of it all, directing efforts and ensuring everyone stayed safe. His leadership inspired confidence, but privately, he worried about how long they could sustain this level of vigilance. The gang wasn't defeated, they were merely regrouping. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Tom arrived with news that sent a chill through everyone. "We've got reports of increased activity near the old mill," he said grimly. "Looks like Victor's gathering reinforcements. If we don't act soon, they'll hit us harder next time." Marcus clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. They had fought so hard to protect the farm, only to find themselves facing an even bigger threat. Still, he refused to let despair take hold. "Then we strike first," he declared firmly. "We can't wait for them to come to us." The plan was risky, but Marcus believed it was their best chance. Under cover of darkness, he led a small team of volunteers, including some of the braver townsfolk, to scout the old mill where the gang was rumored to be hiding. Armed with flashlights, binoculars, and whatever weapons they could muster, they moved cautiously through the dense woods, careful not to make a sound. The air was thick with tension, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves making their hearts race. When they reached the edge of the forest overlooking the mill, they saw exactly what they feared. Dozens of men gathered around makeshift tents, loading guns and sharpening blades. Vehicles lined the dirt road leading out of the property, ready to transport the gang wherever they intended to strike next. Victor stood at the center of it all, barking orders with an arrogance that made Marcus's blood boil. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about power, control, and revenge. Marcus signaled for his team to retreat quietly. Once they were safely hidden in the trees, he outlined his strategy. "We can't take them head on," he whispered. "There are too many of them. But we can sabotage their plans before they launch another attack." The group nodded, trusting Marcus's judgment completely. Over the next few hours, they worked tirelessly, setting traps along the roads, disabling vehicles, and scattering misleading clues to throw the gang off balance. By the time dawn broke, the mill was surrounded by booby traps designed to slow the gang down if they decided to move. Back at the farm, Evelyn waited anxiously for Marcus's return. When he finally emerged from the woods covered in dirt and sweat, she rushed to embrace him. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. Marcus nodded, though his expression remained grim. "For now," he replied. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." As the days passed, the gang's movements became more erratic. Frustrated by the delays caused by Marcus's sabotage, Victor grew increasingly reckless. He began sending smaller groups of men to harass neighboring farms, hoping to draw Marcus out into the open. These attacks were brutal and unrelenting, leaving the townsfolk terrified. One elderly couple lost their barn to arson, while another family had their livestock stolen. Each incident fueled Marcus's anger, but he resisted the urge to retaliate, recklessly. Instead, he focused on strengthening the town's defenses, knowing that patience would be key to winning the war. One evening, as Marcus patrolled the outskirts of the farm, he stumbled upon a shocking discovery. A map tucked inside a discarded backpack left behind by one of the gang members. Unfolding it carefully, he realized it was a detailed layout of the entire town, complete with marked targets and planned routes of attack. At the bottom of the page, written in bold letters, were the words, "Phase 2, Total Domination." Marcus's stomach churned. This wasn't just about taking the farm, it was about destroying everything the town stood for. He immediately called a meeting, spreading the word to as many people as possible. When the community gathered at the local church hall, Marcus laid the map out on a table, pointing to the areas most at risk. "If we don't stop them now, they'll tear this place apart," he warned. "But we have the advantage. We know their plans, and we have each other." Inspired by his words, the townsfolk vowed to stand united no matter the cost. Over the following week, Preparations reached a fever pitch. Barriers were erected around critical points in town, while volunteers took turns keeping watch day and night. Marcus worked tirelessly, coordinating efforts and ensuring everyone knew their role. Evelyn, despite her age, refused to sit idly by. She organized supply drives, cooked meals for the volunteers, and even stitched bandages for potential injuries. Her strength and resilience served as a beacon of hope for the entire community. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. Late one night, the gang launched their largest assault yet. Dozens of vehicles roared into town, their engines echoing like thunder. Victor himself led the charge, his face twisted with rage. But instead of finding frightened victims, they encountered a wall of resistance unlike anything they'd expected. The townsfolk, armed with whatever they could find, fought back with ferocity born of desperation and unity. Marcus coordinated the defense, using flares and noise to disorient the attackers, while guiding his neighbors to safety. The battle raged, for hours, lighting up the night sky with flashes of fire and steel. Though outnumbered and outgunned, the townsfolk held their ground, driven by the knowledge that they were fighting not just for themselves, but for their homes, their families, and their future. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Geiger. Members retreated, overwhelmed by the unexpected strength of the community's response. By sunrise, the streets were eerily silent once again. Exhausted but victorious, the townsfolk gathered in the square, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. Marcus stood among them, his arm draped protectively around Evelyn. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of peace, not because the fight was over, but because they had proven something far more important. Together, they were unstoppable. Victor and his gang had fled, their plans in ruins. Though the threat wasn't entirely gone, the town had shown that it wouldn't bow to fear or intimidation, and for Evelyn and Marcus that was worth more than any piece of land. The aftermath of the battle left the town in a state of cautious relief. The streets were quiet, but the scars of the fight lingered. Broken windows, charred buildings, and the faint smell of smoke still hung in the air. Yet amidst the destruction, there was an undeniable sense of triumph. The townsfolk had stood their ground, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. For Evelyn and Marcus, this victory wasn't just about defending the farm, it was about reclaiming their dignity and proving that unity could overcome even the darkest threats. Evelyn spent the next few days tending to those who had been injured during the clash. Though no one had suffered life-threatening wounds, many bore cuts, bruises, and burns from the chaos. She moved between houses, her arms laden with bandages, ointments, and words of encouragement. Her presence brought comfort to those who needed it most. "We've been through worse," she'd say softly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "And we'll get through this too." Marcus, meanwhile, focused on gathering intelligence about the gang's retreat. He knew Victor wouldn't give up so easily. He was the kind of man who nursed grudges like old wounds, festering until they consumed him. Determined not to be caught off guard again, Marcus ventured into the woods surrounding the town, following the trail of discarded weapons, abandoned vehicles, and hastily erased footprints. Each clue painted a clearer picture. The Iron Claws were regrouping, licking their wounds and plotting their next move. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stumbled upon something unexpected, a hidden camp tucked deep within the forest. It was small, makeshift, and poorly guarded, suggesting it was a temporary base rather than their main headquarters. Inside, he found scraps of paper scattered across a rickety table. Among them was a handwritten note detailing plans for another attack, one far more sinister than anything they'd faced before. According to the note, Victor intended to cut off the town's water supply, effectively forcing its residents to surrender or face dehydration. Marcus's blood ran cold. This wasn't just violence, it was calculated cruelty. He quickly snapped photos of the documents and memorized the layout of the camp before retreating back to the safety of the town. When he returned, he called an emergency meeting at the church hall. By now, the townsfolk trusted him implicitly, knowing that his decisions were guided by both strategy and compassion. As they gathered around him, their faces lit by flickering lanterns, Marcus laid out the grim reality. "They're planning to starve us out," he said bluntly, holding up the photos as evidence. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. "But we can stop them," Marcus continued, raising his voice to drown out the growing unease. "If we act fast, we can sabotage their plans before they have a chance to carry them out." His confidence inspired hope, but Evelyn noticed the strain in his eyes. She knew how much weight he carried on his shoulders, and it pained her to see him bear it alone. The plan Marcus devised was bold and risky. He proposed splitting the volunteers into two groups. One would focus on protecting the town's water source, while the other would launch a surprise raid on the gang's camp. The goal wasn't to annihilate the gang, not yet, but to disrupt their operations enough to buy the town time to prepare for a larger confrontation. Everyone agreed to the plan, though some hesitated, fearing for their lives. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "We've already proven we're stronger than they are," she reminded them. "Don't let fear hold. You back now." That night, under the cover of darkness, the team set out. Marcus led the group heading to the gang's camp, moving silently through the dense trees. The air was thick with anticipation, every rustle of leaves making their hearts race. When they reached the clearing, they found the gang members asleep, utterly unprepared for an attack. With precision and speed, Marcus and his team dismantled the camp, confiscating weapons, destroying supplies, and setting fire to tents. The flames illuminated the night sky, sending plumes of smoke spiraling upward. Meanwhile, the second group successfully fortified the town's water supply, creating barriers and setting traps to deter any attempts to tamper with it. Their efforts ensured that even if the gang managed to regroup, they wouldn't be able to execute their plan without facing significant resistance. By dawn, both teams returned victorious, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they had, once again, thwarted Victor's schemes. Victor, however, was not a man who accepted failure gracefully. Enraged by the destruction of his camp, he vowed vengeance, not just against Marcus and Evelyn, but against the entire town. Over the next few days, his anger manifested in increasingly reckless behavior. Gang members roamed the outskirts of the town, vandalizing property and terrorizing anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. They left threatening messages scrawled on walls and barn doors. "You can't hide forever. This isn't over." The constant harassment wore down the townsfolk, testing their resolve. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus refused to let fear take root. He organized daily drills to keep everyone prepared, teaching them how to respond to various scenarios. Evelyn, too, played a crucial role, using her influence to boost morale. She organized storytelling nights, where neighbors gathered to share tales of resilience and courage. These moments of connection reminded everyone why they were fighting, not just for survival but for the future of their community. One afternoon, as Marcus patrolled the perimeter of the farm, he encountered an unexpected visitor, a young man named Jake, one of the gang members. Jake was barely 20, his hands trembling as he held out a crumpled piece of paper. "I didn't sign up for this," he stammered, his voice shaking. "Victor, he's crazy. He doesn't care who gets hurt." The note contained vital information about the gang's next target, the power station on the edge of town. If they succeeded in sabotaging it, the town would plunge into darkness, leaving its residents vulnerable to further attacks. Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to dismiss Jake as a liar, a trick designed to lure them into a trap. But something in the young man's eyes, a mixture of desperation and sincerity, convinced him otherwise. After escorting Jake to safety, Marcus shared the intel with the sheriff and the townsfolk. Together, they devised a new plan to protect the power station, fortifying it with additional guards and booby traps. The gang struck late one night, their movements swift and precise. But this time, they walked straight into an ambush. The townsfolk, armed with makeshift weapons and unwavering determination, fought back with everything they had. Flares lit up the sky, revealing the gang's positions, while traps slowed their advance. Marcus coordinated the defense, his voice calm but commanding as he directed his neighbors. Slowly but surely the tide turned in their favor. By morning, the gang had fled once again, leaving behind several captured members, including Victor himself. Exhausted but triumphant, the townsfolk gathered around the defeated leader, their faces a mix of anger and disbelief. Victor glared at them defiantly, his arrogance unshaken even in defeat. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You haven't seen the last of me." Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding silence. "It ends here," he said firmly. "Your reign of terror stops now." With the help of the sheriff, they handed Victor and his remaining followers over to the authorities. Evidence, collected from the gang's camps and hideouts, ensured that justice would finally be served. As the dust settled, the town began the long process of healing. Damaged homes were repaired, crops replanted, and fences rebuilt. Evelyn stood on her porch watching the sunrise paint the fields in hues of gold and orange. Beside her, Marcus leaned against the railing, his posture relaxed for the first time in weeks. "We did it, Mom," he said softly. Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "No, son," she replied. "We survived it, together." Though the threat of the iron claws had been neutralized, the experience left an indelible mark on the town. Bonds forged in the heat of battle grew stronger, transforming neighbors into family. And for Evelyn and Marcus, the ordeal served as a reminder of the power of resilience, love, and unity. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew they could face them as long as they stood side by side. The days that followed Victor's arrest were a mix of celebration and reflection for the town. The streets buzzed with cautious optimism as people began to rebuild their lives, piece by piece. For Evelyn and Marcus, the farm became a symbol of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when courage met unity. Yet beneath the surface there was an unspoken acknowledgement that the scars of the past weeks would take time to heal. Evelyn spent her mornings tending to the fields, planting new seeds where old ones had been trampled. Her hands worked steadily, dirt caked under her nails, but her mind wandered often. She thought about the nights she'd spent fearing for her life, the sound of gunfire echoing in her ears, and the way Marcus had stood like a fortress between her and danger. He had changed since returning home, his once carefree demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. Though grateful for his protection, Evelyn worried about the toll it had taken on him. Marcus, too, struggled to adjust. Despite the victory, he couldn't shake the weight of everything he'd witnessed. The fear in his mother's eyes, the chaos in the streets, the desperation of young men like Jake, who had been trapped in Victor's web. At night, he sat alone on the porch, staring at the horizon as if searching for answers. Evelyn noticed his restlessness and tried to comfort him. "You did what you had to do," she told him one evening, placing a warm cup of tea beside him. "No one can ask for more than that." But Marcus shook his head, his voice heavy with emotion. "I should have stopped them sooner, Mom, before anyone got hurt." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You can't carry the world on your back, son. Sometimes all we can do is our best, and you did yours." As the weeks passed, the town slowly returned to normalcy. Shops reopened, children played in the streets again, and laughter replaced the tension that had gripped the community for so long. Neighbors continued to support each other, sharing meals and resources as they repaired what had been broken. The sense of camaraderie born from the struggle remained strong, binding everyone together in ways they hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, Evelyn received a letter in the mail. Its envelope was plain, but the handwriting was familiar. It belonged to Sarah, the neighbor who had first alerted Marcus to the gang's threats. Inside was an invitation to a special gathering at the community center. Curious, Evelyn decided to attend, bringing Marcus along with her. When they arrived, they found the room filled with townsfolk, all smiling warmly. A banner hung across the wall reading, "Thank you, Evelyn and Marcus." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she realized the depth of gratitude the community felt. One by one, people stepped forward to share stories of how her strength and Marcus's leadership had inspired them to stand up against fear. "You showed us that we're stronger together," said Tom, the sheriff, his voice thick with emotion. "And because of you, this town will never be the same." Marcus stood quietly beside Evelyn, humbled by the outpouring of appreciation. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of peace. Perhaps he thought this was what redemption looked like. Not perfection, but progress. Together, they had faced darkness and emerged stronger on the other side. In the months that followed, the farm flourished once again. Corn grew tall, its golden stalks swaying gently in the breeze, while rows of vegetables stretched endlessly across the land. Evelyn took great joy in teaching younger generations the art of farming, passing down traditions that had been part of her family for generations. Marcus stayed longer than he had planned, helping with repairs and learning the intricacies of running the farm. It wasn't easy. Farming required patience and perseverance, but he found solace in the rhythm of the work. Eventually, duty called Marcus back to his role as a Navy SEAL. Saying goodbye was difficult, but both he and Evelyn knew it was inevitable. On the day of his departure, Evelyn stood at the gate watching as he loaded his bags into the car. "Promise me one thing," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Don't forget where you come from." "I won't, Mom," Marcus replied, pulling her into a tight embrace. "This place will always be my home." With that, he drove away, leaving behind a trail of dust that eventually settled over the fields. Evelyn watched until his car disappeared from sight, then turned back to the farm. Life would go on, just as it always had. The challenges they had faced had left their mark, but they had also strengthened her resolve. She was no longer just a 93-year-old woman trying to hold on to her land. She was a survivor, a fighter, and a beacon of hope for her community. News of the town's triumph spread far beyond its borders. Reporters visited, eager to document the story of a small farming community that had risen up against a dangerous gang. Evelyn welcomed them graciously, using the opportunity to highlight the importance of standing together in the face of adversity. "We didn't win because we were stronger or smarter," she told one journalist. "We won because we refused to give up. That's something anyone can do, no matter where they are." The attention brought unexpected benefits. Donations poured in from neighboring towns, helping repair damaged infrastructure and fund programs to prevent similar threats in the future. Young volunteers arrived, eager to learn from Evelyn and contribute to the community. Among them was Jake, the former gang member who had warned Marcus about the power station attack. Determined to turn his life around, he sought refuge in the Yao town, finding acceptance and purpose among its residents. Evelyn took him under her wing, teaching him the value of hard work and forgiveness. Years later, the farm became more than just a plot of land. It became a sanctuary. People came from miles away to visit, drawn not only by its beauty but also by its history. Evelyn greeted each visitor with open arms, sharing stories of resilience and unity. Even after she passed away at the age of 98, her legacy lived on, through the countless lives she had touched. Marcus, now retired from the military, returned to the farm permanently. Standing in the fields his ancestors had cultivated, he felt a profound sense of belonging. The lessons he had learned during those harrowing weeks, the importance of courage, compassion, and community, stayed with him forever. And as he looked out over the rolling hills, he knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, the spirit of the farm would endure, rooted deeply in the hearts of those who called it home.